I just hit my knees and I just began to cry out, just sob and just praying over and over and over again, God, this can't be so, this can't be so. If he's gone, bring him back. I don't know where he is, but Jeff said they're working on him with, extreme measures. And so I thought that's where it was. I'm still, beside myself with, I don't know what's going on. And about a half hour later, I got a call that said he was gone. I have friends that love me that have said, please tell me you're okay. Well, I can tell you if you want me to.
I'll text that.
But it's not the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not okay. But it's all going to be all right. I'm trusting and believing that my faith is being purified. I can say that I think deeper than I have before on these issues. I told somebody I wish I could go back to everybody I've done a funeral for and apologize and just say, hey, I kind of get it a little bit more, where you're at and how you feel. I think that, am I at a place where I just consider it pure joy what just happened? No.
Right. So, did you guys talk about Denham and left me out of the conversation?
No.
I mean, we have something called Microsoft Teams, and it would be easy just to include me on that message.
Yeah.
No, we even have our neutral shoes and a neutral shirt. No, I was just feeling it.
There's also, such a thing as women telepathy, so I think that's what happened.
We knew.
Right.
So.
All right.
Anyway.
So you're doubly left out of this.
No chance to match.
So we're kicking off this episode with some laughs, but as you have read from the title, it will be some serious territory with our founding pastor, and we are calling this the third grief episode, because if you go back a few episodes, there's been a couple already. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to give you all an update. So people who are patrons of this podcast, I'm telling you, every penny goes towards ministry efforts in our local prisons. We've got a guy named Jim Wright, and he gave a quick update. So just want to update you patrons and folks that may not be a patron. Here's information on where your money would go, and you get extra content, some behind the scenes information. But Jim let me know that the program center will be open by the second week of April. And here's what's going on there. He says, "Thank you, Jesus," with an exclamation mark. We are finishing up a second classroom for book studies and an open classroom for hands-on work in electrical, plumbing, drywall, and tile work, and a 10x10 stick frame room for testing. So this guy is helping folks that come out of the jail system get them on their feet, because that's a really hard transition to make, especially when you've been locked up for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's just like, where do I even start? Wow. And they are beginning with the above trades, and they're incorporating classes in job skills, life skills, celebrate recovery. So this vision is coming true, and Jim is actively looking for an electrician and a plumber to come in twice a month for 1 to 2 hours to oversee some of the work. So I'm excited that this podcast is connected to good work like that. And I want to give a shout out to... how cool of a name is this? LB Dantzler is a new patron.
Ooh,
LB Dantzler.
Let's go.
This is kind of neat. And it's obviously, for me, I was like, what? What are you talking about? So a guy comes up to me at Costco, and he says, "Hey, is your name Joey?" I was like, "Yep." He says, "Is your name Joey Svensson?" I was like, "Yes."
Did he pronounce it right?
Yeah, he did, actually.
Okay.
He said, "From the Seacoast podcast?" I was like, "Yes." He's like, "I thought that was you." That's LB Dantzler. He is
really?
He is an avid listener. He says it's the podcast that he listens to the most. And then he wrote me recently saying, "I ran into Lynn Stroy at First Wednesday." He's like, "I feel like I'm meeting all you guys." So
That's awesome.
LB Dantzler, you got a cool name, and we appreciate your support.
That's cool.
So we're here with Abbie Love, Ciarrah Lindsay, and it's starting to flow. It just, Ciarrah comes out now.
You and I are so close now.
Yeah, I don't have to pause and be like,
think about the name. Yeah, I know.
So here's what I texted Pastor Greg probably 3 weeks. I'm thinking 3 weeks after his little brother passed away, because it was kind of like I'll just read it. I was on the calendars a month ago. Pastor Greg, we're doing a 2-parter on grief. My first inclination is that it would almost be an insensitive ask to see if you wanted to come on the podcast with maybe a when your pastor is grieving angle. But you know my heart. I also didn't want to assume for you. Let me know. I can make it work around your schedule if you're interested. So his assistant, who we all know and love, who does a killer job taking care of our dude, pushed us to wait until after the funerals because she was like, he's a mess right now. Like he needs to wait until some of this, you know, I don't know if she was thinking closure or what, but then busyness kind of took over and I circled back around and he said, I really want to do this. So what do you guys think about the authentic vibe this church was built on from this guy's leadership? I mean, it's crazy the respect that he has and he just, from other people, and he just carries himself like a regular dude.
Yeah.
Like, I'll never forget, Jack Hoy, the greater, said this one time when he was my boss. We were in a meeting, and he was talking about the uniqueness of Seacoast, and he said, you know, part of the uniqueness and why people are drawn to Greg's leadership, he said it's a real unique thing, and I feel like Josh and Lisa have the same sort of deal. It's like, you don't look at them and you don't think any other thing other than, I really like that guy. That, you know, and there you've got the flashy pastors and the past, you know, and we all love the Surratt's teachings, but you've got people who are known for, you know, the Priscilla Shires of this world where it's like, whoa, my
traveling
gosh.
pastors
And it's like, our pastors, it's like, I really like that dude. I'd like to hang out.
Right.
Yeah. I just like love the authenticity of it. And like even this past weekend when he was speaking, like what you see, the vulnerability, the rawness, like it's not fabricated. And you like, he's the same person when he's speaking out of his grief process as he is before any of this happened.
Right.
And I just like appreciate that. And I'm like, that's the leader I want to follow.
Right.
If I know that like whether you're killing it or you're having a hard time, like you're the same person and the way you present yourself, whether speaking in a podcast chair, in the breezeway, is the same anywhere. And I'm like questioning your character or anything. Like I just like really appreciate his vulnerability and authenticity to still remain who he is, even in his pain.
Yeah.
Because it would be very easy to just retract, and he's
For
just,
sure.
he hasn't. And, you know, he's taken the time and the privacy, and like you have to when you they pastor a very large church. And so for all of that whole family, like just to see though, they're still the same.
Yeah.
And I just love it. Feel grateful to.
All right. So I wanted to, as we are, and if Pastor Greg is listening back, then is probably uncomfortable hearing us talk about him so much. But as I was putting some notes together to, you know, sharing this time with you guys, I was thinking, so I've been in vocational ministry. I did the math. It's 21 years, and all but one of those years has been at Seacoast. And I remember early on, there was at least one meeting that I was a part of that was just like, how do we reach these millennials? And it's like, now the millennials are older and they have kids. And y'all are both millennials, or you're not. You're a millennial, right?
Gen Z, yeah.
Isn't that
My
crazy,
goodness.
Gen Z?
We're not even in the same. Wow, that's
So one thing.
Put me in the millennial bracket.
One thing that puzzled me through this earlier on, I don't hear this kind of stuff anymore, and I think it's because it feels more authentic. This just didn't feel authentic, and I know that our hearts were in the right place. But I would hear things along the lines, and I would say capital C church all over the ministry world, this concept of, well, for the young people, we need to put more young people on stage so that they can relate and connect. And I was thinking to myself, like, I never really connected with that or vibed with that, but I really was trying to think critically. And I was like, maybe in high school, if I were to walk into a youth group and every single leader was like senior citizens, I'd be like, wow, I feel kind of out of place. Do they have any younger leaders? But I want to say probably when I was about your age, and you're in your early 20s, right?
26.
26,
So
that's
past
right.
mid.
That's right. So I would say
second half.
Yeah.
Not early anymore.
Probably in my early 20s, I didn't think that way at all. If anything, I would think, wow, there's an older person. And, when I was in my early 20s, Pastor Greg was probably about the age that I am right now. But so I saw him as an older person. And those are the kind of people that I wanted to learn from because I saw them as further down the life experience, more longevity, more wealth of knowledge. And I'm curious, where that lands with y'all. Like, do you remember there being a time in your life where it's just like, I just can't relate to, someone who's older than me. I need younger people in my life. Like, how does what I'm saying land on y'all?
I think an observation, like even with you saying in high school maybe, and then past that, you didn't relate to that anymore. I think it would be the same for me. And even looking at students now, I think part of that question may be like a spiritual and emotional maturity of you come to a place where you're like, okay, if I want to grow in my faith, if I want to grow to become a better human, I need to learn from someone that has done this before and has more life experience, has more faith experience. But I think, in high school, I would have, I think it was both and. I definitely learned from older generations, but having just like younger generation, early 20s people to look up to felt a little more attainable rather than me being a 14-year-old having to, learn from a mom with 3 kids. That just didn't feel relatable. But I'm now at the point where I'm like, I can learn from a mom with 4 kids. I can learn from a woman that has been divorced. I can learn from a woman in her 60s that is learning how to be a grandma. There's just, I think there's a spiritual and an emotional maturity that's like everybody in different seasons has different nuggets that are beneficial to me in my season now.
And my guess would be that your sentiments are fairly common with the sort of people that are wanting to learn from church leaders. And I feel like these days that I'm reflecting on, we would look at people at that age and be like, oh, Ciarrah's not going to connect to people here unless we get younger. And I'm like, I don't think that's how that age group thinks.
Specifically also talking to about people being on platform, right? Younger. Yeah, that's different. That's true.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like a time and place for everything, right? Like honestly, like on a Sunday, if they're going to preach the gospel and really if we're going to be convicted, I'd rather someone that has some life experience and knowledge in scripture, and not to say that they can't be a young person, but who I'm looking for on a Sunday might be different than who I'm looking for on a Wednesday.
Sure.
So, and I was thinking about that. I'm like, man, if I read books, I like reading books about people who maybe are young moms in ministry because that's the season I'm in.
Right.
And I have my mom friends, but I'm also just desperately seeking for the people that are 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, just what you were saying. I want the generational differences and knowledge, but that comes with maturity. And also just, there's I feel like you can't blanket statement everything.
Yeah.
So do young people relate to young people on stage? Yes. But I don't think that means that then you should only have young people on stage. They need someone with the maturity to guide them through, but they also need someone they can relate to.
Yeah.
In all the aspects. So it's you can't really have one or the other. You kind of need a mix of it all.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of someone who I would assume the 3 of us would all kind of vibe with. And so Rick Warren came to mind. Just the beauty of a heart of this guy. And he's way older than even me. I don't think the 3 of us, if we found out that he was coming to teach, we'd all be like, I can't wait to hear what this guy is going to teach the people at Seacoast. None of us would be like, I'll skip it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that may be a bad example because of his name and his, fame or whatever. But I think we would all be legit interested in learning from this guy who we know is further down the path than we are. So anyway.
But there's also, I'm you could also have the argument, I'm thinking about First Wednesday at Mount Pleasant was a young adult takeover, and everyone that was in Stephen spoke, and he's in his 40s, and so he's that authority for the young adults, but also the people leading worship were young adults, the people hosting were young adults. There was there was a value for other young adults to see, oh my gosh, that's me.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you needed some of that spiritual authority with, young adults were on the prayer team, but they were partnered with someone else who was older. And so, like, I would sit under a teaching of a 28-year-old any day, like if it's the right time and place and what they're teaching is sound and in the right environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because they're younger than me I don't care.
I totally agree. And I think that, I feel like we're three friends talking, but at the same time, there's people that are going to listen back. So I don't want to sound arrogant and like pointing to myself as I'm so mature, but I do think that there is a maturity level to where we really embrace the fact that I can learn from my kids.
Yeah, totally.
Like real good stuff. I don't mean like social media stuff. Like, I can learn Snapchat from them. I mean, I could learn some really good stuff.
Totally. Whitney teaches me things every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She's 3.
I mean, we do, at Seacoast, we do Next Gen Weekend where, younger generation students, kids will be on platform leading worship or even like hosting ministry moments in a sense. And there's something to be said about like, I lead a high school girls small group, and it's like, I'll sit there and they'll start pastoring each other. And so it's like, I learn from younger generations just as much as people that have more wisdom than me. So, it's just an attitude thing of how do we receive people's teachings because God is doing a work in everybody's lives, whether they're 12, whether they're 18, whether they're 25 or 40 or whatever. And it's really just about like, okay, let me learn from what God's doing in your life right now, no matter what your age is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul has a pretty famous verse that was written to Timothy about not looking down on
It's almost like our student ministry is built on that verse or whatever.
Hey, did y'all have much, so we're transitioning to Pastor Greg here in a second, but have y'all had much interaction with Pastor Jeff Surratt? So Pastor Greg's other younger brother who's older than Chris. So
I did a little bit when he was still here in Charleston, but that was a long, long time ago.
Yeah. So he was my boss for a good long while, and I'm as someone who respects him, I'm also comfortable with saying that he can be very snarky. And I will never forget when he blew up along the lines of what we've been talking about. He blew up these sentiments in a meeting where someone said, man, I just don't think that, younger people are going to connect with, this person because their age or blah, blah, blah. And he went on a list. He said, oh yeah, he was very sarcastic. Yeah, that's a good point. Like Louis Giglio, and he went off on this list of older people that young people are connecting to, and I was like, oh, mic drop.
And then done.
All right, it's Pastor Greg, seriously, sharing his current grieving heart and what it's looked like. And then afterwards, the three of us are going to talk for a second and share some of our thoughts and what you're about to some of our thoughts about what you're about to hear. Pastor Greg, you were just talking about how crazy busy it is at the Pastors Collective or at the church retreat. I always say
retreat
at Church Creek.
There you go.
Did you think about with everything that's specifically with your little brother's passing, did you at any point think, man, I just got to pull away for a couple of months? Like, did that occur to you at any time? Like, I just have to pull away.
Fortunately, or unfortunately, however you want to say it, we had a break. We remodeled, had to do a redo for, approval purposes at the retreat, and the redo took longer than we thought it would. And so when I got the news on my brother, we were not having retreat. So it was kind of like a break. And to be honest with you, the last couple of weeks of actually restarting that after several months, that's been the happiest place for me during a day or a week, is to be doing what I feel like God created me to do.
Yeah.
And so that's been a good thing.
Yeah, gotcha. We got to get you in here another time for some fun. It's been a while, and this is not one of those moments of fun.
Not so much.
So we've had conversations on grief in episode 139 and 140, so just a few episodes back, and we were working on releasing these when Pastor Chris passed away. And I am curious, do you think it's part of the pastor in you as to why you were not adamant's probably a strong word, but you really wanted to have this conversation? Like, I didn't have to twist your arm. Yeah. Like, is that kind of the pastor in you?
Probably.
You think so?
Probably. I think so. I didn't ask you to do this.
Right. I reached out to you.
You reached out to me. I thought my first response was, I don't really want to do that. And then very quickly after that was just the idea that I'm a leader, and a lot of people go through this. In fact, that's one of my revelations in this, I think, is to be more attentive to the fact that, especially in a church like ours, that at any given weekend or week, there are several people that are going through some pretty serious grieving process. And I thought maybe it could be helpful to normalize or, so I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of people could say this with me. It's been tough seeing you suffer. We love you, man. We love you very much. Tell us a little bit about your brother. I to jog your memory, so this is how old school I am here. When I became a campus pastor at the James Island campus, Pastor Chris was still a campus pastor, but it was maybe weeks or a couple of months.
Yeah.
And then Pastor Ross took over. Yeah. So we crossed paths during that time. And then my wife Priscilla, during that time when we thought we were going to build a building on James Island, they actually, a team, including Priscilla, took a trip to the church that Pastor Chris was at for a while, and she was just unbelievably hospitable. Mm-hmm. And I think he's known around as the nicest Surratt brother.
Yeah, he is. Jeff said during his service that he's the one we all liked.
Yeah,
he was the favorite sibling. He was my parents' favorite child. You're not supposed to have that, but sometimes they do, mm-hmm. and I understood that. Yeah. I didn't grow up with Chris. It's interesting, just that I was almost 17 years old, 16 and a half, 17 years old when Chris was born.
Was he an uh-oh baby?
What?
Was he an uh-oh baby? Like,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And my next youngest brother is Jeff. He's 6 years younger than I. So Chris was 10 years younger than Jeff. And so he was born. I left the house when I graduated. My parents moved to another state. I came home to visit, but I never lived there. So I didn't know Chris, he was kind of a fun little brother, mm-hmm. But I didn't know him. I really didn't get to know Chris well until he moved here to work for us.
Wow. And he must have been in his 20s, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Probably. He was here for, 14 years, something like that.
Was he the worship leader here? I know he led worship, and I remember him teaching too, because we were attending in 2002, and I remember he was an occasional teacher.
Yeah. But he didn't lead worship. He directed the music. Okay. He helped write songs, and he was an incredible keyboard player, something I always wanted to be, mm-hmm. and he was. Yeah. And so I don't know that he was the primary worship leader, but he was very instrumental in all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yesterday in your message, you touched on this, and just for our podcast listeners who may have missed that sermon, and just tell us a little bit about that day when you found out. And
Yeah, it was, it was just a normal day. Every day I was part of a meeting. I think it was maybe even a message planning, I'm not sure, that we do on Thursdays. And I got a phone call from my brother, Jeff, and he, we're all introverts. And so we don't call people, okay? An introvert doesn't call people. Right. They if they do talk to people, they text people.
Right. And when they call us, we send it to voicemail so we can
screen it. You're one of those.
Yes.
And then we text back if we can.
Right.
And so if you have a friend that's an introvert, or you want your pastor to, I can connect you with a pastor, one of the ones on staff that's an extrovert. But anyway, I saw that and I thought, well, he calls. I wasn't alarmed, but I thought I better take this. So I stepped into a side office, and Jeff, I could tell his voice was, different. And he said, Chris has had a heart attack. That's what we thought at first. And they're working on him. I'm at the hospital, and it doesn't look good. That's what he said. And I got to go. I got to be with Jenny. And so immediately when I heard that, I just hit my knees in front of a chair that I was sitting in, and I just began to cry out, just sob. And in fact, I was afraid I was going to interrupt whatever was going on next door, but I really didn't care. And I didn't want people in there necessarily, but I just poured out my heart and just praying over and over and over again, God, this can't be so, this can't be so. And I had just read a book called Imagine Heaven, which was all about near-death experiences.
And John Burke.
John Burke, yeah. And great book. Really was good for me for a lot of reasons. And I'd read it as kind of a New Year's resolution to really solidify my faith in what heaven looks like, that kind of thing. And so I'm crying out to God, thinking, well, that's the reason I read the book, and just, God, bring him back. If he's gone, bring him back. I don't know where he is, but Jeff said they're working on him with, extreme measures. And so I thought that's where it was. And about a half hour later, my wife came in, just happened to come into the office and didn't know what was going on. And then my family ended up, she called my family to come in. And then I'm still, beside myself with, I don't know what's going on. And about a half hour later, I got a call that said he was gone. And it was so sudden and so unexpected. You expect me to go first. I'm the oldest, or Dad. My father's 90 years old, and you would expect a call like that, but Chris never. And so it was just a total shock.
Yeah. Like you literally had 30 minutes, not to necessarily prepare, but for your brain to get used to there's something going on.
Yeah.
I mean, you had 30 minutes.
Yeah. And the reality was, it was a, I don't know what they call it, pulmonary
embolism. Yeah.
Embolism. It was a blood clot in his lung. And, he was gone.
Yeah.
And all of the trying to bring him back probably, was just what they had to do, but fruitless. And
it probably about a week into it, it just occurred to me like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh my gosh, Pastor Greg's dad is alive. There's a parent that just lost a kid.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Pastor Josh and just said, I didn't even think about your granddad. And he told me that, when he found out, he just sobbed. I'm like,
one of the hardest things I've done in my life was to go from that phone call over to my dad's place and tell him that his baby, his youngest son, was gone. And it was, the whole family came. And I asked them to wait outside until I told them, and then I told them, and they all came in. And it was just, you can only imagine.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of it, there was humor. There's always humor with our family, because my dad said in his grief, he was our best child. And then I let it go, and then he said it again. On the third time he said it, I said, Dad, you've already said that 3 times. 8 times he said he was our best one.
That's pretty funny.
Which I wasn't offended. I knew that. But
Right.
in the midst of the deepest, darkest sorrow, there was humor.
Mm-hmm. And for our listeners' sake, there's a sister Surratt too.
Yeah, my sister Dee.
Yeah.
And she's between Jeff and I, so
Okay.
they had it well planned out. It was me, and she was 3 years later, and Jeff was 3 years later, and then whoops.
No plan there.
God had a plan, but they didn't.
Man, I've been thinking, there's a lot of people grieving in my life, and Pastor Greg, I'm 47 years old, and I have not had to grieve at those depths.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't lost a parent, haven't lost a sibling. I mean, I've definitely been super sad about passings, but I'm like, wow, this is great for me.
And you probably are, I don't know, based on what I'm saying this, but you're probably in the majority.
Yeah.
Most people your age, probably haven't experienced grief at that level, that close.
Yeah. So I don't know, because I haven't gone through it, I may ask some questions. You're like, that's a really stupid wording, but I'm getting my thoughts out here. How fast did the shock go from shock to grief? Like, when did the grief settle in? Because it's just like, I can't imagine having to get used to I've got an older brother, and if I found out that he was gone, I don't know when I would get to the grieving, because I'd be like, that didn't make sense, especially how you found out. 30 minutes, it doesn't look good, and then 30 minutes later.
I think, and I'm not an expert on grief by any means. All I know is what I've gone through, and I did, as I do, when I find myself in the middle of something that I'm over my head in, I research it. That's what I've always done as a pastor at Seacoast, at various levels of...
On the most updated technological device, too.
Yeah, I do. And so just skipping forward, when I flew out to Colorado and I'm on my way home, I downloaded a book on grief. Not just grief, but the loss of a sibling, which is a unique type of grief. And so what I would say is the grief started immediately. It was, there can be shock with, an announcement of some kind, but this was shock mixed with grief. Immediately, there was deep, deep grief. And
it just washes over you? Is that a good terminology?
I don't know about wash. It knocked me over. It's like, it would be like a wave that just knocks you over. And at first, it's almost like you're in a spin cycle. You don't know which end is up. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know any of that. And I know for me, there was about 3 or 4 weeks. What are we? We're a little over a month out from it. And the first at least 3, maybe 4 weeks, there's just a dark cloud all the time. Just a fog. I felt like I was in a fog. In fact, I remember, and it was probably because of the retreat. We were going to open the retreat, and I had one day, about 3 or 4 weeks in, where I told my wife, I said I for the first time thought about something besides today and yesterday. I had a thought about the future, and I would say right now, I'm not in the fog. I'm in a fog today because I preached yesterday 3 times, and it's a Monday fog, and I'm getting old. It was pretty emotional. So I'm back to a fog today, but I go in and out of a fog several times during the day, of let's just do what we need to do. Let's get onto the, normalities of life, and then something will happen. A thought will come. And sometimes I'm right in the middle of tears again, but
Yeah. Is it silly to ask how this compares to other losses? Like, I know you lost a parent.
Sure.
You lost a best friend.
Yeah, I've lost 2 or 3.
Yeah. That's like, is that a dumb question? Maybe worthless? Like, what good does that do?
I don't think so. There's a lot of questions, I lost my mom, and frankly, the reason I was reading Imagine Heaven is because I think I got stuck on my mom 30-some years ago with this idea that her body is in Decker Prairie, Texas. I don't get there. I've been there maybe once.
Where is that?
Yeah, it's Decker Prairie, Texas.
Prairie.
It's down around Houston somewhere. And the idea of leaving my mom there, it just haunted me. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't think about it. It would, even though I'm solid in my faith, very much so. I'm just being transparent here. I didn't want to go to where she is, where, any of that, bounce back and forth and stuff. And so that's part of the reason I was reading the book. But her death impacted me but we had 5 years to prepare for that because she had cancer, and her last days of cancer were just horrible. Yeah, her last year. And and some people who've lost a parent or, a spouse or whatever in those circumstances, you understand what I'm saying. You miss them desperately, but it was almost a relief for them, And so that you had that mixed together that may have mitigated some of the grief that I felt. So that was different. Frankly, with Darren, I didn't have time to grieve. It was, and I've tried to work on that. I've talked to counselors about that. We were just trying to survive. We had the craziness of COVID and all the political stuff that was going on at the time. And in the midst of it, Darren dies. And we've got to take our staff and our church through a grieving process. And we're not meeting, we're online. And so that was a unique time. Now, did I have times, and have I had times where I remember one, I'm driving through Charleston and get to a stoplight, everything's fine, and all of a sudden I'm sobbing my eyes out. And that happened. It happened when I went to St. Louis, and I was in a hotel one night that nobody else was in, and after going from hearing it on a Thursday night, flying to St. Louis, talking to Amy and all of the family and all the friends and all of that, and going, suck it up, you're a leader. I'm telling myself that.
Yeah.
You've got to lead through this. They don't need you to be,
Is that good advice that you gave to yourself, do you think?
I don't know if it was or not. It's the advice it's what I had to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody had to lead, And I remember being in that hotel and just falling apart for a little while. And I've had, and then some crazy blogger wants to do a negative story on Darren, and so I'm fighting through all that kind of stuff, and
what a way to try to gain followers and exposure for your blog.
Let's don't even go there.
Let's don't.
But unless you want to, so I don't want to say I didn't grieve. I did grieve, but this hit me like nothing I've ever had before.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into some faith stuff, and then we'll wrap it up with more relational things. Like, I'm just curious, what are some things that have been helpful that other people have done and said? But as far as a faith standpoint, and I hearing you touch on it yesterday in your message, I think I know some of these answers, but have you ever doubted God's goodness in this journey of losing your brother?
That's an interesting question. I will say that denial has been a wonderful friend. I didn't really, you've got the stages of grief, and I always thought that denial was negative, but actually it helps you get through some things. And there is, at some point, you've got to come to a point that goes, okay, this is very, very real. And I probably shouldn't even bring that up because there's so much intricacy in it. The reason I do bring it up is I'm saying maybe I'm in denial on this now. Okay. I don't think so, but maybe so. One positive thing that I think prepared me for this awful tragedy is that I settled in my mind a long time ago that God exists. Hebrews says that in order to have faith, you need to believe that God is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. That's the scripture. Over a period of years, I have really come to down in my spirit that God is. Okay, I mean, all the arguments for atheism and agnostic and all of that, they just don't make any sense to me. Okay, it's popular at various points, and what's interesting is today the same ones that were popular just 5 years ago are starting to go, maybe there is. So I don't have that. I really, and I explained yesterday that when I got saved, I'm one of these that had to dig deep into is this real? Okay. And I've settled that And the way I say, I don't care whether it's, I know what I believe, but I don't care whether you say 7 days of creation, 7 eras of creation, or just a big bang somewhere. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say it doesn't matter to me. Somebody's going to attack me on that. But I don't care. At this point, I'm as old as I am, but it does matter in some degree. But really, there was nothing, and then there was something. There had to be something that is eternal. And so I settled that years and years ago. And in walking through grief with other people, the question always is this: is God immortal? Is he all powerful? Or it's not immortal. It's
Omnipotent. Yeah,
omnipotent. Is God all powerful? And is God all loving?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if he and the argument opposed to God is that, well, if he's all powerful, he can't be all loving because he let this happen to my brother and all of that. And you can take all kinds of things. Or if he's all loving, he must not be all powerful. Mm-hmm. I put a third one in there that would say, and it's helpful to me, that he is both of those, but he's also omniscient. He's all knowing. Okay. So, and Job has been helpful to me before this time, where Job's, arguing with God a little bit, and God says, were you there when I created the whole thing? No. And the point that he's making is that there are some things that Job doesn't know that God does. And I have just assumed that there are some things in every situation that I face that God knows that I don't. Okay? And to me, it's arrogant of me to shake my little fist at God and say, you should have done it this way. I have no idea what the future held for Chris. I have no idea what the future holds for Jenny, Jeff, Dee, myself, my dad, whatever. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And looking from God's perspective, maybe there's purpose. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to leave it to him.
Yeah.
And please don't tell me that, well, God just needed another worship leader in heaven.
Yeah.
I might smack him.
Right.
Okay. What a poor reason for, but God has.
Makes God sound kind of messed up.
Kind of messed up, yeah. But on the flip side of that, I have no idea what God's plans are, but I know that He is, and that He is good, and that He knows. And so I kind of rest in that.
Yeah.
Long answer, but
yeah, no, that's good. I think I've read in some sort of theology book that in times like these, we could doubt God's goodness or power in the event that we didn't have faith in a future redemption of all things.
I agree with that.
Because it's like all this bad stuff is happening and you're not going to do anything about it and you're all powerful, but we have that hope in what God will do.
That's what I know.
Yeah.
I know that, and boy, I've read those scriptures over and over and over again over the last few weeks about what Jesus said about the future, what Paul said for the church. I don't want you to be ignorant about what's going to happen. They had questions. Church had questions. What about, they all thought Jesus was coming while they were alive, and their friends die, and some of them die horrible deaths, and, what's up with that? And Paul says, hey, don't be ignorant of this. They're with Jesus. He's coming back, and, settle your hearts on that, and don't grieve as those who have no hope. We grieve. That's what we do, but we have hope. Mm-hmm. We have hope.
Yeah. So is your faith being refined, strengthened? I've got a couple of verses to read. One in James, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And then one of my favorite verses in 1 Peter, in this you rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer through various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith may prove to be for praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So it's like faith being our most precious thing. And if anything purifies that, in the end, we're all going to see it as good. I mean, I don't know if that's a good translation, but how would you describe what's happening to your faith right now?
Well, I'm trusting and believing that my faith is being purified. I can say that I think deeper than I have before on these issues. I told somebody I wish I could go back to everybody I've done a funeral for and apologize and just say, hey, I kind of get it a little bit more, where you're at and how you feel. I think that, am I at a place where I just consider it pure joy what just happened? No.
Right.
I have room to grow there. Will I get there? Probably. I preach that, and he's preaching that, the writer of the scripture, to encourage people, and I believe that theologically and mentally. I don't feel that. I don't feel like, wow, this is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked in those other grief episodes, and I don't think that if that pure joy were to ever come, it wouldn't replace the grief. They would coexist. I
think so. Yeah.
Could you understand how people in your current shoes would turn to unhealthy stuff?
Sure.
Like does that make sense to you, where someone's like, you know what?
Yes.
I don't want this pain.
Yes.
I need to drink it away. Or,
Yes. I don't want this pain. I get that.
Yeah.
In those first few nights, I just want anything to take the pain away.
Yeah. And you're a human being just like all of us. Like what keeps you anchored away from that? I mean, if you had to put it in words, why doesn't Pastor Greg turn to something unhealthy?
Well, and I'm not saying I don't, maybe I don't, I'm not turning to drugs, alcohol, or sex, the big three that we think about. But part of it is because I've been around a while and I've seen what that does.
Yeah.
I understand why somebody would, just to mask the pain. But I also have seen what that does and how destructive it is, and that maybe it masks the pain for a little bit, but then you may either acquire a destructive habit, you do destructive things to people that you love. It's not an answer.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to dig a little bit deeper than the surface things.
Yeah. Read through. You've been. I love how you have taken to Facebook. Has it been therapeutic and help? I mean, I think it's been helpful to other people, but I would imagine it's therapeutic for you too. And I've got questions concerning some of the choices of words you use. I don't know if you used exactly the phrase redemptive grieving, but you definitely talked about grief redeemed. Like, unpack that. What does that mean to you?
I think my brother, Jeff, we have a group thread, and boy, that's hard. We had a group thread with my siblings, and we were going to continue that, and I got into that thread and talked about how much I miss Chris, and it just didn't feel right being in there. And so we started another group thread, and it doesn't feel right leaving him out of all of that. I can't believe I'm saying that without crying, because I have done that in the past. But so it's also complicated. But my brother Jeff pointed to somebody that used the word redemptive grief. I can't remember who it was or what it was. And I thought, that's where it is, that God promises, I believe, to redeem all things. There's going to be a redemption of the world, however that happens. God redeems our hurts, our pain, and I believe that God redeems our grief also. He knows it's going on. And I want my grief to be, for there to be something good that comes out of it. Something good, not just for me. I want Chris, I want one of the things that I first thought about with the whole process, and even with posting on Facebook and the services, and maybe I've overposted, I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
But,
who cares what I think, but.
a couple, 3 reasons. One, I wanted, again, I'm a leader, and I wanted to be real, honest, and also, maybe helpful to other people who are processing. But I also there were 2 things that I said at Chris's memorial service that I wrote down just hours probably after he died on the plane on the way home to Denver. I want people to know God, and I want them to know who Chris was. And so a part of redemptive grief, perhaps, and there's so many pieces of it, but in my mind, is that people would know God and how He works, and that would be redeemed, and that the memory of Chris would be redeemed too. I want people to know who he was and what he did and all of that. So that's a little bit of kind of what I'm leaning into there.
Mm-hmm. I've heard the phrase "suffering well."
Yeah,
I like that phrase too.
Yeah.
Why do you? It just seems like the Bible normalizes suffering. And then I definitely encounter some forms of Christian faith where it seems like some Christians view genuine suffering as almost like some sort of flawed weakness. Yeah. Why do you think Christians are so uneasy with words such as you have put in Facebook, "I'm not okay right now"?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Talk about that. The great theologian Jelly Roll sings a song that I've listened to over and over and over again because it's been kind of my go-to, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. If you've ever been in pain, you understand what he's saying when he says, "I am not okay, but it's all going to be all right. It's all going to be all right." And then he roots that in, the gospel story in the third verse of, just like country always does. But that made it okay for me because, people ask me, "How you doing?" Well, I think I'm doing okay, but I'm really not. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I'm probably more okay than I was 4 weeks ago, and probably not as okay as I'll be, 3 months down the line, or 6 months, or a year, or whatever. I'm not the same as I was. And there are moments when I was really leaning into that, just really not okay. And I have friends that love me that have said, "Please tell me you're okay." Well, I can tell you if you want me to.
I'll text that.
But it's not the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not okay, but it's all going to be all right. I think that when we get on a streak of winning, whatever winning is in life, you don't lose. You talked about you haven't really lost somebody close to you, but you've had other losses, you think that that's normal. That's wonderful. Thank God for it. Gratitude's awesome, but we're not in heaven yet. We're not to the place where there is no sin. We're not to the place where death is not the final enemy. It is the final enemy, according to Jesus. And so because we're here, there's going to be some things that we're not okay with.
Yeah.
And I think that walking through what our friend Chip has gone through with the lung transplant and all the things that went there, I remember him saying to me, this was when we had lunch at one point discussing the reality that he may not be here much longer. And yet he had faith. He had more faith than I did, I think, at that time. And he said the big word for him was trust, that, this is what God says. He's going to redeem this. I've got to trust him. I don't know exactly how.
Yeah.
And that's been a big deal.
Just throwing this out there, do you think in this season with what you're going through, do you think the "how are you" question, and obviously we know that everyone who's asked you that, almost all of them have probably had great intentions.
Great intentions.
Don't you think that's maybe reserved for real close people? Like, I love you and I know you love me. I'm not going to come up to you and say, "How are you?" because I don't think you want to get into it for an hour with me.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
Miss Debbie, Chip Judd, people who are, you would talk to them for a couple hours to share.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a rule of thumb here.
And you kind of get that because you're tuned into the whole mental health kind of thing. But everybody has been, oh man, our church has been so wonderful. And frankly, in times like this, it is so awkward.
Yeah.
Coming from your point of view to me.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what to say.
Right.
You want to say something, you want to, and you don't know what to say. And at first, it kind of irritated me that some people would push me on the okay question. I think.
Like push for an answer?
Yeah. But I think now I've got a lot more grace for it. I get it. It's real hard. it's you don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A few more questions. Do you think Jesus would? I'm going to ask you a question for Jesus.
Okay.
You speak for Jesus on this.
Yeah,
one.
there you go.
Do you think that Jesus would be cool with this paraphrase? So one of my favorite verses in the Bible is, "In this world you will have trouble. Take heart, I've overcome the world." So going with what we've been talking about as far as your comfort level and the legitimacy of you're not okay right now, how about this? "In this world there will be times when things are not okay. Take heart, I have overcome the world, and there will be a time when all things are okay."
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Should I do a Bible translation?
No, I can't speak for Jesus on that. But yeah, I mean, that would be like the Amplified Bible, which isn't exactly a translation,
Yeah.
just adding some extra words to it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there are times. I mean, you look around today at what if I lived in Ukraine or Israel or where Syria this weekend, a bunch of Christians apparently were killed.
Yeah.
And I think about that, and I go, is my plight all that bad?
Right.
You compare, but things aren't okay here, and they will not totally be okay in general, globally, until Jesus eliminates sin and suffering and all of that. Until then, it's part of what we do, and we learn to allow Him to redeem it.
Yeah. You said on Facebook how being at the church on a Sunday is both comforting and terrifying. I would imagine, does that have to do with the comfort of being with your church family and know that you are loved, but is the terrifying, is that the conversations, or is that going into real world stuff where it's just like, oh, I'm not ready to go back into normal life, or what's the terrifying part?
Yeah, it's all of that. Being with the church, I love being with the church. I know one weekend, what my deal is, I sit on the front row and cheer on whoever's doing whatever, and then I usually go out in the foyer because I want to be around to embrace people, and that's a little bit of a challenge for me because I'm an introvert.
Right.
I'm borderline introvert. But I needed to be at church because I just needed whatever happens there, and I left early as I do, and I'm going out into the foyer, and I walked out into the foyer, and I looked out. And I turned around and walked back in because I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
It just was overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You seem to have a good balance of keeping your eyes on eternity and at the same time not dodging the grief. And it seems like sometimes maybe people would have a hard time embracing both.
Yeah.
Like, I just got to have my eyes on eternity, and that makes things all better.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to resort to grief and just throw my hands up in the air and be stagnant and not.
Sure. Well, the way I think about it with our family and myself is that I am very anchored in the fact of where Chris is and that I will see him again. I just am. I think the Lord gave me a little, snapshot into what that looks like.
The dream.
Yeah. And now, if you say to me, Joe, if you come up to me in church and say, Chris is dancing with Jesus, I might slug you. We don't dance with people. It's just, maybe that's your gig, but it's not mine, and that's distasteful to me. But anyway, maybe I'm wrong about all that, but that is where I'll get a little, then I'll have to remember, people are just being, they're being as kind. They don't know what to say, and they're being as kind as they can. I mean, Peter at the Mount of Transfiguration, he didn't know what to say, so he said something really stupid. Hey, let's build some tents here and live here.
Right.
It's like we all do that. But I don't remember what the question was. We know where he is,
Right.
and we know we're gonna be there. It's the gap.
Yeah.
That's
only hard for us, not for Chris.
Yeah, exactly. But it is, and that's where the grief is, and I can't deny that.
Yeah. What are some practical things that maybe you've learned on your own through this, the Holy Spirit Pastor Chip, other friends that have just practically gotten you from one day to the next? Because that's hard just to get to the next day.
Yeah. I read in the book that I got on the way home from Denver that I mentioned earlier, that one of the things you need are grief partners or a grief partner, somebody who it's safe to talk through what you're thinking about. And I've had that.
Yeah.
My wife, Debbie, and I probably wouldn't always recommend that because some people can handle it, some people can't. I've even said to her sometimes, you're probably tired of talking about this, or I don't want to burden you with this. And she's wonderful. Right. She has just been amazing, absolutely amazing. And there's a couple other people like that.
Just share everything that's going on.
Yeah, what I'm thinking, even if it's crazy, just this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. I just need to, because if it stays in here too much, you spend too much time in your own head, and it's not healthy. So that's one thing. Grief partners. I've not been to Grief Share, which the church has, which I think probably would be very helpful in all of that. And I'm thinking about, well, people are saying, well, why haven't you been? Just seems I'm not ready because of probably my visibility. More, I'd like to go to an AA where nobody knew me, kind of a thing. A routine with God. I can't get there every day, but I have a place out on the retreat where I go and I talk to God. I talk to Chris. My conversation with Chris is a monologue, but it helps me, and I cry, and I've done that regularly. Okay, not every day because I can't get there every day, but I do have a place where I go. I took Jenny and my wife out there and showed them where it was.
That's Chris's wife, not
Chris's
your daughter.
Wife, And Jenny has said to me periodically, when you go, could you tell them this? And with Chris, I don't, I wish that I could have a conversation, but it's a more of a monologue, and it's helpful for me.
Well, I have this childlike faith that Jesus may be like, hey, Chris, get over here.
I do
Your
too.
brother's talking. I want you to hear this.
Yeah,
Why not?
I do too. I think that they know more than we think they do. So that's a comfort to me, and who knows. So I also, have a routine of reading the Bible and trying to pray every day. Now, I've got to be honest with you. There have been days where I didn't feel like doing any of that, And I've given myself some slack on that I'm not okay, but I'm going to be okay. What else? I have a country faith playlist.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And I listen to that periodically, and it helps me. And I cry with some of the sappy. I have favorites every day.
Merle Haggard does some good hymns.
He does, but we're not going back there. No, that's not what it is. What it is what's interesting with country music. This is a whole other deal. But how many ever years ago? Maybe 20. You had one guy who was kind of doing Christian country, whatever, and now it's just lots of them. It's the young guys, contemporary guys that are just putting faith in their, and I'm not going to critique their faith and all of that kind of thing. It's been helpful for me to let emotions out.
Right.
And music's helpful with that.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I think it's I do think it is extremely meaningful and helpful for you as someone who's looked up to so many people, just because there's so many people at Seacoast that listen to your messages and have for years and years and years. For you to be open about your grief is meaningful.
So thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Hopefully it's helpful.
So you guys have listened. I will tell you just a few things that stood out to me. honestly, we on the front end, we already talked about the authenticity, and I mean that's the most pronounced thing for me. But I love how taken care of he feels from this church.
Yeah.
That to me is huge because I walk through that personally. Like the James Island campus back in 2019 walked through a situation where their pastor could not be a pastor to them. And people were pastoring me. So from Josh and Lisa to Chip Judd, all the way to the folks that just attend the James Island campus and serve in the James Island campus, they were taking care of me. And I think that's what people need to realize is that pastors they may have a calling to shepherd people, and I really do believe that is a calling, but they're also people that get broken and will have a run-in and grief or even addiction or just what have you. And we need shepherding. We need help from other people. So I love the fact that he felt that from this church. I thought it was really insightful, and I want to, no offense to Pastor Greg, I want to clear this with a therapist, but I thought it was so interesting how he said that the denial stage is helpful because you're not coming to grips with it, and it's almost like a cushion, temporary cushion. That a permanent denial wouldn't be healthy.
That's why there's multiple stages. It doesn't end with denial.
But the thought of denial being a good thing temporarily was a new concept for me, for sure. And then I'll tell y'all, as someone who's been podcasting now for over 10 years, there's podcast regret, and it's like listening back to something and then go like, why didn't I go for? But I really wish that I would have probed further. Did y'all hear when he said that he thinks back on, and it sounded like he was lumping them all together, all the funerals
Yes.
I was gonna
and wish
say.
that he could go back and apologize.
I know.
I was like, I really wish I would have been like, you got to unpack that a little bit more. That's just some of my thoughts. I asked y'all to bring some of y'all. So
I think, that was something that stuck out to me too. And it's part of that like vulnerability in how our church leadership in general leads this church of like, and it's the sweetness of the Lord to bring us through seasons that will it's kind of like a wake up call of like, hey, you have people in your congregation week in and week out that feel this way, that feel the weight that you're feeling. But to go back and almost like feeling guilty in the sense of like, I want to go apologize to families. I don't know. Yeah, there's obviously grace for that, but it is. That's a heavy feeling to feel like, okay, now that I'm in the seat that I usually pastor people in, I can't imagine the power that it'll hold from here on out on how he is now able to pastor people in pain. Something you said this at the beginning of the podcast of, I don't have a ton of experience with grief, fortunately. Still have.
I know, isn't that a great thing not to have experience in?
Yeah.
I have both of my grandparents on both sides, and then so
still alive.
Still alive.
Dang.
Wow.
I know my dad's dad just had a bit of a scare with a stroke, but he's on the up and up as it's looking right now. But over the past week, we've just been reflecting of like, this is like such a gift. We haven't had to actually deal with this face on. Obviously, even if we haven't with a life, like grieving a life, there's grief looks different in different seasons, whether it's disappointment and all the things. So I do have experience with some sort of grief, but not in the weight of like losing someone that's close to me. Yeah.
I just think like I was, when I like looked back at grief, like just thinking through my own life, I was like, wow, I really haven't had that much. I mean, my grandparents, none of them are alive anymore, but like my grandma, and Pastor Greg was talking about this too. Like when my grandma passed away, she'd been sick for 7 years. It was like, oh, Grammy, go see Jesus, girl. Like, we know you're going to heaven. Like, we're good. And she was just in so much pain at the end that it was almost a relief when she finally passed. And my grandpa didn't die until he was in his 90s. And I never knew my one grandma, my other grandpa, he died when I was little. I don't remember it really. Like, so it was interesting because my the loss that I've experienced personally has never, ever gone that deep.
Right.
But then just last year, lost someone that I feel like, I mean, I had a great relationship, but it wasn't like, I wouldn't have said like he was the closest to me, just was more of like a spiritual figure in my life. And that felt like the most like pain. And it was more of the idea of like, oh, I'm never going to get to talk to you anymore. And so listening to Pastor Greg's story of just like the randomness of it, the, you know, just how quickly it changed and how fast everything, I feel like I'm like, okay, you've been fortunate to not have experienced much. But now that you're learning this, I'm like, I feel more motivated then to be able to, I know grief is going to come. So how can I learn from him? How can I learn from the things that they're saying? And even he has an interesting perspective of saying, I wish I could go back, like what he would have done differently. And now what he's doing now of like, okay, Abbie, when grief comes, like, how are you going to react to it? Yeah. How are you going to process it? How are you going to, I know he mentioned this of like, I can get why people get addicted and seclude and isolate. Right. And I'm like, that's not in my nature now, but I am sure if I was grieving, I don't want people to see that ugliness. Right. Yeah. I don't want people to see the pain. I don't want people to see any of that. Right. So I will seclude and isolate, and that's not good either. So I just am like, so appreciate it, because I'm like, okay, I feel like this is going to, so many people are going to be able, if they can see their leader being open and vulnerable about this, then I feel like it's going to set up a whole group of people to just enter into pain in a healthy way, because it's going to come. Right.
And I just want this notion to be dispelled that I think we carry around, and I use the word we loosely, that we want to see our leaders always whole and never struggling. And I think that's what gets a lot of pastors in trouble, especially when there's a potential unhealthy issue, like a sin issue, is we've set them up for some sort of failure, because it's like, well, we don't want that from you. Yeah. You know, we don't want that kind of stuff. We like the guy that's on Sunday mornings teaching us that. And I think that opening, you know, what Pastor Greg did on this episode as far as sharing his grief, that is more relatable. That does draw people in to say, well, I can be pastored by that guy and his teachings because I can tell he's being honest. Yeah. You know? And I don't think people can learn. I think people can sniff out inauthenticity, and I think people shy away from it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if, I mean, even like me on the other side, getting to watch sermons on Sunday, I would choose a vulnerable, real, raw message over a polished, like, whatever you want to call it, any day. Like, I think, I mean, I'm on staff and I'm human and I mess up. And it's honestly one of my favorite things. I get to sometimes
mess up. Yes, your favorite thing.
It's my favorite thing to mess up. Praise God.
Love it when I mess up.
I love messing up.
But I get to like come before the congregation, whether it's host moments on Sundays or, you know, have preached at like sisterhood events or whatever. And it's my favorite thing to be vulnerable and real about things that I've struggled with in the past, because it just easily breaks down that like, hey, I'm on staff.
Oh, she's on the same level.
And like know the Lord so well, so therefore I don't ever mess up.
Right. And imagine if you were not working at a church culture where that was the norm.
Exactly.
Like that would be I couldn't be here.
Was getting
like if we didn't function that way, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, you're okay. It's modeled by our leadership. So that's why it's like, because we know, and again, there's freedom in vulnerability. The Bible says we receive forgiveness through confession to him, and then healing through confession to one another. So it's like we're one another, whether like we're on platform or whether we're sitting in our seats on Sunday. So whether it's confessing of sins or confessing of, hey, I'm not doing good, like I'm grieving, I have heavy feelings. That's where the healing happens, is like amongst one another in the congregation. So I also loved his perspective of, Pastor Greg talked about how he's sitting in this like why question of like, why now, why him, why at this age, and just kind of what you were saying, like knowing we haven't really dealt with grief on that level yet, but it is coming because that's how life is. It's finite. Settling now, like knowing there is a God, and settling now that I believe he is good and he works all things together for good. So when things happen that are bad, still like this needs to be settled now so that when the bad things happen, the lies of the enemy don't skew that belief. So I think it's really powerful that he gets to sit in the seat of, no, I don't feel good. I don't feel like this is working for my good, but I believe there is a God that is good. And one day I believe I'll get there. It's just not today. So, yeah, I love that thought too.
Love it. Love it. Well, our hearts are with the Surratt family, Pastor Greg. I'm pretty sure Pastor Chris's wife is Jenny and the kids. We love you guys. And Pastor Greg, hopefully this conversation brings some warmth to his heart. So thank you guys for listening ahead and chiming in on this with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You've been watching Seacoast Church's Things You Won't Hear on Sunday podcast. You can now become a patron of this podcast and receive exclusive content. Your support goes towards Seacoast ministry efforts and local presence. Also, be sure to leave us a review and subscribe to this podcast so that you get these episodes as soon as they're released. All of this information can be found in the show notes. Thanks for watching.